Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating story of Ibn Khaldun, the man and his world, covering the years 732 to 808 AH. Now, right off the bat, I want you to forget the image of a quiet, sheltered academic just sitting in a dusty room. Seriously, scratch that. Ibn Khaldun was a brilliant survivor. His life was absolute chaos, filled with danger, and it was exactly that chaotic lived experience that actually birthed the entire science of civilization.
I mean, listen to this quote from him. A devastating plague swept through nations. It rolled up much of the beauty of civilization and wiped it out. He's talking about the Black Death here, and the literal crumbling of empires right before his eyes in the mid-14th century. Just imagine that for a second. Being surrounded by a relentless plague, constant warfare, and rapidly failing states. That wasn't history for him, that was his everyday reality, and it shaped literally everything he came to believe about human society. Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly did a disgraced politician, someone who spent time in a prison cell, who constantly navigated these treacherous royal courts, and who literally had to flee for his life multiple times, invent the science of sociology? That's the big, dramatic, central question that's going to guide our entire journey today. We are going to see exactly how survival and scholarship collided.
To truly grasp his genius, we kind of need a temporal anchor to map this out. Born in Tunis in 732 AH to a well-respected Andalusian family, his early life was anything but stable. Decades later, you see this dramatic retreat to a remote castle in 776 AH, which marks a massive turning point, before his eventual death in Egypt in 808 AH. It's basically the map of an incredible hero's journey through some of the absolute most volatile regions of the medieval Islamic world.
So let's jump straight into his early years, a world completely in upheaval, defined by intense politics and high-stakes power plays.
See, as a highly educated young scholar, Ibn Khaldun didn't just study history from a safe distance, he was thrust directly into the cutthroat political arena of North Africa. Look at this track record. He started out doing early political service for the Hafsids in Tunis. Then, he moved over to the Marinid dynasty in Fez, where he served as a prominent court official, and actually ended up imprisoned there. Much later, he would serve the Mamluks over in Egypt as a highly respected chief judge. He was constantly navigating these backstabbing courts, repeatedly shifting his alliances just to survive those treacherous political waters.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast in his timeline. On one hand, you've got his youth and middle age in the Western Maghreb and Andalusia, which are defined by this messy, totally pragmatic reality, turbulent politics, constantly shifting alliances, and, doing time in a prison cell. Contrast that with his later years in Mamluk Egypt, where he finally finds his stable life as a respected Maliki chief judge and a revered scholar. But getting to that stability, well, that required a massive, world-shattering breaking point.
And that breaking point brings us to a desperate escape and his legendary retreat to the castle.
4. That is the number of years he spent in complete, self-imposed intellectual quarantine. The political games had finally gone way too far when his close friend, the brilliant scholar and vizier Ibn al-Khatib, was violently murdered in prison. Fearing for his own life and just utterly exhausted by the public's fear, Ibn Khaldun completely abandoned politics. He withdrew to the remote castle of Ibn Salama in western Algeria. For 4 straight years, he totally isolated himself from the politics of the world.
But during this isolation, he experienced an unparalleled intellectual awakening. He wrote this about it. Words and meanings poured into my mind until their essence was churned and their results organized. I really want you to frame this isolation not as some peaceful, relaxing retirement, but as a desperate necessity. He was trying to make sense of a world that had gone completely mad. The result of all this intense reflection? His absolute masterpiece, the Mukaddimah, or the Introduction to History.
And that brings us to the core of his work, the science of civilization, where he literally breaks down the mechanics of history.
So, the crucial point is that during those 4 years of isolation, Ibn Khaldun shifted from merely surviving history to analyzing its hidden gears. His groundbreaking sociological theories were birthed directly from his survival, and the concept anchoring his entire worldview is asabiya. Translated basically as social cohesion or tribal solidarity, it is the fundamental bond that enables a group to achieve power, conquer, and establish a state. In his view, without asabiya, there is no state, period. But with strong asabiya, a unified group can literally change the map of the world.
He noticed a distinct pattern in how this solidarity actually functions in the real world. On one side, you've got Bedouin life, rugged, rough, courageous, and fueled by extremely high social cohesion.
That's strong asabiya right there. On the other side, urban life, characterized by luxury, eventual corruption, and a total dependency on paid mercenaries for defense. This beautifully illustrates where asabiya is born, out there in the harsh, unforgiving deserts, and where it ultimately goes to die, in the soft, easy comforts of the city.
Let's move to see how this builds directly into his famous generational life cycle of a dynasty. It's like clockwork. Step 1, a group has tight tribal cohesion and that desert toughness. Step 2, because of this collective strength, they conquer territories and build a state. Step 3, they acquire vast wealth and settle into urban luxury. And then, inevitably, step 4. Because of that luxury, they lose their solidarity, corruption sets in, and the dynasty collapses, ripe to be conquered by the next tough group. He didn't just guess this. He observed this exact cycle firsthand across North Africa.
So, what are the specific symptoms of a decaying state at the end of this cycle? Well, you start to see an extravagant court life and a complete loss of that original toughness. The rulers become dangerously disconnected from the everyday people. Because they've lost their own warrior's spirit, there's a heavy, desperate reliance on paid mercenaries for defense. And finally, to pay for all this luxury and those expensive mercenaries, they impose crushing taxation on the populace. Remember, he didn't just read about this stuff in a cozy library. He wrote about the decay of empires because he literally survived their collapse.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the most intense chapter of his life, confronting the conqueror Timur Lenk. It was the ultimate test.
Picture this scene. Ibn Khaldun is an old man now, serving as a judge in Damascus in the year 83 AH, when the city is suddenly besieged by the terrifying Mongol conqueror, Timur. Now, instead of hiding, Ibn Khaldun is literally lowered from the city walls by ropes to go face to face with him. Astonishingly, he spent 35 days in the camp of Timur Lenk. During this time, he acted as a diplomat, sure, but also as a sort of intellectual hostage. Timur was totally fascinated by his knowledge, and Ibn Khaldun had to use every single ounce of his intellect, charm, and historical expertise just to stay alive.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate test of his life's work. The philosopher of civilization literally meets the conqueror who is actively dismantling it. Timur interrogated him, demanding these highly detailed geographical descriptions of the Maghreb, which was Ibn Khaldun's homeland. So Ibn Khaldun sat down and wrote out a massive, detailed geographic manuscript for him, using his deep knowledge to secure his own survival and his eventual safe release back to Egypt. It is just the most incredible tension between academic theory and raw, brutal historical reality.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative question. Are modern societies still bound by the relentless cycle of asabiya and decay that Ibn Khaldun survived over 600 years ago? Think about it. When you look at the rise of nations today, the corruption of luxury, the growing disconnect of rulers, and the fracturing of social cohesion, his 14th century survival guide feels incredibly, almost uncomfortably relevant. It really makes you wonder where exactly we are in that cycle right now. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep analyzing the world around you, and I'll see you next time.